Randall Curtis. Randall is he's the Rhode Island Coordinator, but more important, he's the Rhode Island Coordinator. But more importantly, he is a pastor of Frenchtown Baptist Church in Rhode Island. So Randall, take it away.
Welcome. I'm glad to be here, and I'm pretty excited to talk about our topic. I personally am not very strong in the area of money myself. I give like everyone should, but how to use money the best, I love to hear about that from experts like I am not. We do happen to have an expert with us tonight, and if we can have the slide it's Tom Melzoni. He's the Senior Vice President of Horizon Stewardship, and he is an expert on the use of money. And he's going to tell us more about himself to kick us off. But it's great to have him here. And I will be monitoring the chat for the questions. And also, if the chat is quiet, I am going to be coming up with my own, hoping to stump our guests. So, we want to keep it lively here tonight. Right,
Absolutely.
Tom? Tell us about yourself.
Hey, Pastor Randall, thank you. Hey, everyone. I am a product of the cooperative program in that my father was a church planter in the state of Ohio. Many, many years ago, we moved from, you hear a little Southern accent, we moved from Kentucky to Ohio, and Dad planted a church there. And I remember my bedroom being my Sunday school class, and my garage that we had a car. We'd pull it out on Saturdays, and I'd sweep it out and set up chairs, and we'd have worship there. So those are my roots. I've had the joy of serving in some of our large Southern Baptist churches through the years. You may have heard of First Baptist Church in Dallas, Texas. Back in the 80s, I had the joy of serving in that particular congregation as their senior executive pastor. For the last 27 years, I've sort of toured the country, been numerous times in New England, which is absolutely my favorite part of the world. Helping churches just think through vision, think through how they can fund vision, and then most importantly, how we grow disciples when it comes to generosity. And so our journey tonight is going to be sort of in two or three parts. One is I'm going to deal with philosophy a little bit, fly at maybe a 30,000 foot level. And then as we try to land the plane near the end, we're going to get into some actual practical things you might do in thinking of this title, generosity, is the new evangelism. So let's just take off and let's understand that generosity is systemic. It's not a program. It's not a sermon. It's not a Sunday school class. We can keep going on through to the next slide. There it is. Generosity systemic. It really is a sort of a positioning, maybe in some cases a repositioning of leadership in direction of a church to develop a culture, a feeling, a people that are generous in their own lifestyles. I like to think that my churches, those that I pastored, one that I'm a part of currently, is that we live in the reality of abundance as opposed to scarcity. And many, many times we often get in meetings and instead of asking, is it God's will, we ask, how much is it going to cost? And both questions are important. But if it is God's will, then in my opinion, God's going to help provide, the funding for the needs. And we just have to think positive, but in that process, we've got to help our people live, in the abundance of God. Culture is key. When we start thinking of generosity, I know it's a slow turn of the dial, particularly when we're changing culture, but culture is key. I like to ask the question, who taught you to give? And how did they do it? In fact, Randall, why don't you just answer that right now, since we're going to go back and forth. Who taught you to give and how did they do it?
Well, my parents taught me to give, and they taught me to give by giving 10% of everything I ever got. If I got a Christmas gift of a dollar, I gave 10 cents, and everything was tithed.
Yeah, and I like asking that question. It's a question that's not threatening, because everybody in the church is going to have a different answer, and it's going to be their answer. It also helps me learn a little bit about them and about their background from a giving perspective. I like to think that a giving culture is a permission system, and so we really need to ask questions, and then it becomes a matter. This is how we do things here. That we're going to be about offering permission for people to live into the concept and journey of generosity. We must live out as leaders generosity. It's a thread that runs through our organization. And the last little statement there, really key, is a poor giving culture trumps a great vision. I know many churches that have a great vision. They share it with me, but their giving culture limits them from being able to accomplish their vision. I want you to be informed. So just some statistics that I want to share with you in just overall church culture. Today's church, this is all around the United States. It doesn't matter what size. These are norms, all right? Your church may be different. I understand that, but these are norms. Today's church, 16% of the people give 84% of the money. 44% give 15%, and 40% give 1%. Now, I know the question is, yeah, that's the Sunday morning attendance, all right? That's not just somebody that walked through our doors and haven't been there in 6 months. This is our Sunday morning attendance. The typical person of faith, I'm going to say it since I'm talking to Baptist, the typical Baptist gives about 2.4% of their income to the Lord through the local church. When I see that, I laugh a little bit in both tears and joy, in knowing that I'm glad God grades on the curve, since the reality is we believe that tithing is at least a tenth. Then when I look at these numbers, I'm just really glad God grades on the curve. But it also tells me this: we have a great opportunity to develop people. This is as sad as this number might be. I don't want to sit and complain about it. I want to take action. And how do I grow people in giving? How can I move this needle? So as we keep thinking about our cultural shift, I want you to understand that a good strategy is better than a good intention. What is your generosity strategy? If you want to even use the word stewardship, they're two different words. Stewardship's about management, generosity is about giving. But if you want to interchange those words, I certainly understand it. But what is your generosity strategy? What is your stewardship strategy? Being general obviously is not working. So now we must become specific. I'm going to say to you that the focus must be on the spiritual formation, not fundraising. I've been called a fundraiser through the years. I don't mind that. It's a great profession. I have all the credentials that one can get in the fundraising world, but I'd rather be called a faith raiser. I'd also like to be called a cheerleader, because God loves a cheerful giver. I'd like to be able to submit to every church that giving is what God wants for you, not from you. And that our need to give as a people of faith is far greater than our churches need to receive, as great as that is. So in planning your strategy, I hope that we move away from the concept of trying to raise funds to trying to raise people, that we're about faith raising, because I do believe that giving is a phenomenal, tangible act of faith. In many ways, it may be the one tangible act of faith that we have in our spiritual lives. So think about your strategy. I like to encourage churches to have narrative budgets. Now, what's a narrative budget? Well, many of us have spreadsheets, and I understand that. Many of us have numbers that we give to our congregation. I understand that. But I'd like to submit to you that spreadsheet budgets are really for boards and accountants. Oftentimes, in fact, most every church I walk into, I have people in the congregation who say to me, I don't understand our budget. I don't understand our budget report. I get that. There's X amount of people who have real intense interest in, quote, the actual spreadsheet. Most everyone, if not everyone, they love to know what's the money doing. And that's not in a statistical perspective. It's in the power of a story. What do I mean by that? Hey, last week we had a youth event. We had 22 youth here. Billy was amongst those youth. Let me share with you what happened in Billy's life. Now I'm sharing Billy's story, but I've translated it into 22 youth at a youth event. Hey, did you know we spent $850 on that youth event? Wasn't that a great investment? As you're giving, you're making Billy's life and others like him possible. That's the kind of budget presentation that inspires people to be greater givers, but it's also informed them about some of the details of the budget. So I would love to encourage you to move your so-called budget language to a ministry plan, to a spending plan, to a vision plan. Just start making that shift. It will take a while because we've been using the word budget most of our lives, if not all of our lives. And there is a budget, but to the congregation, I would really encourage you to move in another direction. Generosity is contagious.
Hey, Tom.
Yes.
So I also am wondering, do you think that also helps the church stay focused in how they are spending their money? If all the ministry leaders are forced to think in terms of of where is this money going, vision wise, ministry wise, story wise, then does that help the spending work out better?
Absolutely, Randall. One, it places giving in the mission. I mean, it shows mission. Number two, exactly what you said. As people are starting to focus, as leaders are starting to focus on the impact in people's lives, I think they become better stewards. But number three, as people are hearing these stories, they begin to see that their dollar is making a difference because they've heard far too often, and these are always with good intents, but they've heard far too often, we got to pay the light bill, or we got to pay salaries. And no, I understand that. Okay, I understand that. But I'm giving about the mission. If we don't have a mission, I don't need a light bill. If we don't have a mission, I don't need staff. So yeah, I think it does encourage people to give as they're hearing the actual impact that's being made in people's lives. But generosity is contagious. Giving begets giving. So, I mean, here again, Randall, what we're saying here is I hope leaders will model good stewardship of funds. I will again go back to, I hope we're talking about abundance, not scarcity. There are a few people in the church who will give more generously when they hear you're behind, but not many. It would be very difficult for me to raise money for the Titanic. It went down, or when it was going down for sure, and far too often. And again, with great intent, with great intention, far too often we have appealed to the negative, and so I want us to think through how we change our language to be talking about the good things that are happening. Giving outside the four walls, obviously that's cooperative program giving. Our special offerings, Annie Armstrong, Lottie Moon. I mean, all those are are giving outside the four walls, as well as other things that we're going to talk about before this night's over. But, talk about those things. The video that we showed, I'd be showing that a couple times a year in my church. And I know the cooperative program produces other videos. And man, what a great opportunity. Already produced are these videos, and to share that right before an offering and to come back and say, your giving's helping make all this possible. That's giving outside the four walls. For those of you who have staff, but I know you all have key volunteers, talk to them about giving. Use the question I asked in one of your meetings. Hey, who taught you to give? How did they do it? Allow the language of stewardship to become normalized and it not be off limits. Far too often, we get afraid of talking about giving because it's not a normal part of our conversations. Be a leader. Follow me. Generous organizations are led by generous leaders. Do your people know you give? If you're a pastor or if you're a leader, do your people know your giving story? Share it. Be open right before an offering. Say, I just want to share my own life. How I became a giver. What's influenced me in my giving life? Randall, you talked about your parents, teaching you to be a quote tither. Share that with your people. I think they need to hear it over and over and over again. Now, obviously not every weekend, but we need to be open about being generous, in our own leadership. I will tell you, yes.
How do you do that while, but avoid what Jesus said about not announcing your generosity in public?
Oh, I understand. That was in the Sermon on the Mount, and it's one of those, shall we say, discussion points that we can all get into. is that Jesus was talking there, in my opinion, about the actual giver giving with a haughty spirit. King David, if we go back to 1st and 2nd Chronicles, actually announced what he was giving. That was an actual amount that he announced. In the Sermon on the Mount, it was more about the attitude as opposed to the visual, because in the same context, the very next verse, where basically you're speaking of not letting the right hand know what the left hand's doing, is he also said, don't have any public prayers. And so if we're going to put the whole context of that teaching, we really got to think through. And again, this will be a great discussion, maybe a whole seminary class on, if we're not going to talk openly about giving, then we use that verse, then we probably shouldn't have any public prayers. And again, everybody on this call may have a different perspective, but that's how I look at it. And so it becomes a matter of even how you share it, Randall. If you're sharing it out of arrogance and out of pride, then you shouldn't be sharing it. I do think that's a prohibition from a scriptural perspective. But I think our testimony is our testimony. It's our story. So, talk about your journey. That's how I would encourage people to do. Just talk about your own giving journey. I don't give because my pastor gives, but I love knowing that he does give. Does that make sense? Okay. Yep. Leverage the weekend experience. I work with some faith-based nonprofits because I only work with faith-based groups. And every major nonprofit that I work with would love to have 52 opportunities to speak to their givers. I'm working with Life Action Ministries out of Michigan right now, a great evangelical ministry. Some of you may have used their students, in the past, and speaking to their CEO just today. He said, man, I'd just love to be able to speak to my donors. And so the church has 52 opportunities to be able to share about generosity. The challenge is what we've been talking about, Randall, even in sharing our own testimonies is we've got to normalize the conversation. And that's going back to cultural shift, even within our leadership. Who taught you to give? How did they do it? What does giving mean to you? Allowing it to be part of our just everyday lifestyle. I use the concept of a revolving door because I do think that we need to be having what we call offering talks, meaning that maybe 90 seconds before you receive an offering is that you're sharing something. And so here would be a sort of an overview. We could do another whole seminar on just what the offering talk looks like, but share theology. Hey, we believe that giving is what God wants for you here. We believe that our need to give is greater than our church's need to receive. Or we believe in tithing. We believe it's 1/10 of our income. If it's your theology, share it, teach it in a 90-second. Storytelling, share your own story, but share, like I said, about the youth. I used that illustration already, so I'll not go back and try to repeat that, but share some stories of what money is doing. I mean, the cooperative program videos are storytelling. So these are great opportunities to use those testimonials. Have people come and share. If you can do a video, it makes it easier, but have them come and share their own. Who taught me to give and how did they do it? That's a testimonial, and it's very light. Accountability. Hey, did you know we have a financial report? It's produced monthly. Did you know? I mean, I told this to our own church last weekend. I said we have a CPA who comes in every 3 months just to look at how we do life at our church. Isn't it great to know that as you're giving to a church that we believe in being stewards? And then say thank you. There's 3 things you say to givers: thank you, thank you, thank you. and far too often, again, they hear some of the negatives, but say thank you. Now, I know we're in COVID and we're probably not passing offering plates right now. I understand that, but don't neglect having an offering. One of the things that when churches moved to online is that they forgot to receive the offering, and it became awkward. I understand it. Receive an offering online. And use these stories, or use this revolving door as a means, and then share the various ways that your church might be receiving gifts, whether that's through the mail or through text giving or through online giving, just however you do it, and then say thank you. That means you got to embrace the ministry of asking, and then that's hard. I mean, I'm going to use this CRO, who's the chief resource officer. I'm basically placing the pastor there. It could be someone else you assign in your church, and I get that. But there is someone that really needs to be able to embrace the ministry of asking. Here we go again. It's what we want for the people. It's not what we want from them. Invite the first, second, and third pocket of giving. What are those? There's 3 pockets that people give from in the life of the church. One is just their, shall we say, their tithe, or their ongoing giving to the ministry of the church, however they frame that terminology. The second is for capital needs. And so there'll be, capital needs, or there'll be missional needs. It's a second pocket of giving, special offering type needs. And then the third pocket of giving is the one that we rarely embrace, and that's legacy giving. Leaving, quite frankly, the church in our estate plans. I'll just share my story. My mother-in-law, about 10 years ago, called me and said, I want to talk with you, but don't bring my daughter. so I said, I'm really in trouble. So I went to visit her, and she said, Tom, you know that I tithe to my church. And she said, I would love for you to figure out a way that the $1,800 I give to the church every year, I could give it throughout eternity. Can you help me do that? And so I sat with her, and we figured out the appropriate legal means for her to be able to put on deposit into a trust fund that would pay off every year $1,800. And so for the last 10 years, on the first week in January, the Huber Heights First Baptist Church in Dayton, Ohio, receives a check for $1,800. That's the third pocket of giving. And I would hope we would love our church enough, or even New England Baptists, with all the great ministries going on, that we would really maybe take it up a notch on that third pocket. Listen to your people. Listen to what's going on. Ask permission to ask. Again, that's the culture. That's the language, is being able to just ask permission. May I ask you something? And then information, inspiration, and invitation. All three are absolutely critical. The next one I'm just going to fly through real quick because I want to make sure we get to some of your questions. Is many of us have fears of the higher capacity givers. It's amazing to me that we honor the other spiritual gifts in our church more than we honor those who have the gift of giving. I'll spend time with Sunday school teachers. I'll spend time with other leaders in the church. But if I spend time with those who may be perceived as having resources, I get afraid, I get afraid of what others are going to say. And yet all spiritual gifts are equal. There are those persons in, I won't say many churches. I do think that God has put some people in every church who has this gift, but certainly there are some people in churches that have been blessed financially. I have been blessed to be around some very, very, very wealthy people. And here's what I learned from them. They're lonely because their spiritual leaders don't know how to talk with them, or their spiritual leaders are afraid to come and spend much time with them because of what others might say. And I mean, I have a gentleman in New Jersey right now that was giving $1 million a year to his church. And he says, my pastor doesn't even know how to take me to lunch. And then he laughed. He says, I'm not mad. He says, it's just that I'm lonely. I'd love to hear my pastor's vision. I'd love to be part of more of the conversation. He says, I'd love to give to more things, but I'm never asked. He says, I give to my church. I give very generously. And so look through those persons in your church who may be blessed financially, and just have a cup of coffee with them. Just don't talk about money. Talk about them. Learn about them, because they're spiritual beings also, but they really could make up financial leadership, just as you have teaching leadership, just as you have maybe elder leadership or have deacon leadership, small group leadership. Financial leaders are also an important part, of the congregation. So they need discipled too. Measure your progress. You can't manage what you don't measure. You need accurate, specific giving data. Data mining has become an important part of the church. And what I mean by data mining is not just the typical numbers we get, that we had 65 in attendance last week and our offering was $2,122. And some of you might even be comparing that year over year. I'd certainly encourage that. What did we have a year ago? Obviously, in this pandemic, things have shifted, but in normal times, I would hope that you're at least looking at it from at least that 25 or 30,000 foot level. But learn what your per capita gift is. When we get back into session, meaning we're fully regathered and life is back to normal, and I'm hoping that will take place at least in the next 6 months, then what is your per capita gift? What's a per capita gift? If I had $1,000 come in the offering plate and I had 50 persons in attendance, then my per capita was what? $20. every person who walked through my door, they gave $20. Now we know that's not true, but that's my per capita giving. And what you want to work on is year over year, is my per capita giving going up? Now I could give you what the national average is. I'll give you this. The highest per capita giving church in America gives $146 per person who walks through their door. That would be awesome.
Tom, are you
Yes.
talking about, are you including children, or are you only thinking of per income earner?
You know, it's according to who walk. One, you can do it any way you desire. Is that if you want to count every attender and you divide that into your offering, you're going to start measuring yourself against yourself. So here was my per capita a year ago. Here is my per capita now. And if you're using children, fine. You have to measure it accordingly. Because what you're looking at is, are my people growing literally in their giving from a per capita perspective? And it's not the only way of looking at it, because we're obviously looking at weekly offerings, but it begins to tell me about my church. It also begins to tell me about my socioeconomic level in my church. And there are churches that's going to have very high per capitas because their zip codes are different. And so sometimes we are guilty of comparing our church against another church in another region, and that's not fair. You want to measure your progress against your progress. So great question, Randy, but it really, once you set your benchmarks, to stay with it, whether you're including children or not. It also helps you forecast what could be. What do I mean by that? Years ago, there was a guy by the name of Andy Anderson, and when we called it the Sunday School Board before Lifeway came along, is there was this thing called the growth spiral, and you could project your budget based on growth, because if you had again, I'm going to use $20. If $20 was your per capita gift, that meant if you wanted to increase your giving by $100, you needed 5 new people. See how that works? So you can forecast what your budget really could be based on growth by using these particular numbers. So again, don't get hung up on it, but data is becoming more and more important in every avenue of life. So measure your progress. You accelerate what you celebrate. Catch your people doing something good. I love sometimes going to the Hilton brand, the Hampton Inns, because they used to wear buttons that said, catch me doing something good. And so even in your own church, create a positive, hey, just catch your people doing something, brag on them. Celebration changes culture. You don't have to just brag on giving. I mean, it's brag on somebody showing up 2 weeks in a row. I mean, that'd be great these days, because the typical attender only comes 20 times a year. But find your people doing something good and celebrate it. Again, say thank you. Write thank you notes. Write thank you notes. I am in charge at my own church where I attend now. I send a personal handwritten thank you note to all first-time givers. And here's what I say. I noticed you gave a gift for the first time to our church. What a great step in your spiritual life. I celebrate that.
I like how you say step, because it implies there's more steps to come.
Exactly. Exactly. And I'm also I'm trying to help our own church shift to culture and the people know that, I have this knowledge. So it's not like it's not like everybody knows. I know, but I'll pick out someone who's been a giver for 5 years and write, hey, Randy, thank you for being a faithful giver for the last 5 years. I'd just love to know what causes that. Could we have a cup of coffee? Again, I'm trying to seek out stories of what's caused Randy to be, a faithful giver. So celebrate people's giving. Again, privately, it may not be within the culture to do it publicly, and I understand that. But still, help people grow, because this is a discipleship journey. Generosity is the new evangelism. I don't know if I coined that phrase, but I've been given credit for it, particularly by your executive director there in New England. So thank you. Uh, but generosity is magnetic. It provides common ground and a common experience. And generosity is where the Great Commission and the Great Commandment meet. Let me just share with you a story. I was with a church group a couple years ago, pre-pandemic, obviously, and about 15 in this group. The pastor had scheduled for them to have a dinner at a local restaurant, and so we all ate. The church was picking up the bill, and so the pastor said, you guys go ahead, I'll take care of the bill. And so the pastor came out and he was weeping, and I said, what's happening? He said, well, I gave them a triple tip. And I said, awesome. And he said, the waitresses, he said there was 3 of them, as you know, the lead waitress that I gave the bill to started weeping. And she said, I knew you were Christians. And she said, I've been trying to witness to the other 2 waitresses. And their comments were, when they heard you're a Christian group, is don't expect a pretty good tip tonight. And she said, I'm going to be able to share with them that you gave us a triple tip. And sure enough, all 3 of those waitresses ended up being part of that church, 2 of them being baptized. All right. Generosity was the new evangelism there, because those, I'm not saying you triple your tip, not saying that at all, but I am saying that as we go about, as we go, generosity, the culture of generosity is not just giving to my church, even though that's important. Culture of generosity is, how I do life. And so as we're out there, we need to be givers. As I said, I grew up on the cooperative program, and I'm not ashamed at all, shall we say, of just saying to you that, it's a powerful, powerful giving program. And that's what it is. It's a giving program to where people's lives are being changed. And I really want to re-encourage you, as you think about instituting offering talks, is to use some of the videos again, because it's a powerful, powerful tool. My own life, I'm here tonight because people invested years ago, shall we say, in their churches, and didn't even know I existed. But what are some things you can do to really make generosity, an evangelistic tool? Well, have weeks of random acts of kindness. Okay, just encourage your people to have random acts. What might that look like? Well, they could go to Dunkin' Donuts, because I know that's big in New England. That's where I got introduced to great coffee. They could buy $5 gift cards and just give them out randomly. Oh, I don't know if they'll use them properly. I don't know how they got into that. I'm glad God didn't ask that about me. Did I make the right decisions in my life? Is just be kind. Generosity is a new evangelism. So encourage some random acts of kindness. A lot of people go through a restaurant line and say, look, I want to pay for the car behind me. Just encourage some random acts of kindness. Have some special weeks that you do that in your church. Now, have your people share what they did. Just have them share stories of how it made them feel. They may not know the result, because sometimes they're done anonymously. But I want to hear how it made you feel, Randall, when you did that. You want to hear how it made me feel by just being a giver. So again, random acts of kindness. The $5 giveaway, I'll give you where that came. Is I took Master Life. Oh man, many years ago. You may have heard of Master Life. It was a great discipleship program. And in that program, I remember I was in Shreveport, Louisiana, going through a whole week of training in Master Life, and I wept. I mean, it got a hold of my life. And one of the things that it taught me to do was every week give $5 away, just at random, just give $5 away. I can't promise you that I've done that every week. All right, I'm going to sit here and say no, I haven't been faithful. But boy, I tell you, when it does come to my mind and it's there, just doing something like that, is a blessing. Some community events that you might consider is, many towns have festivals. And I learned this from the church I presently attend, is that we go to those festivals and we go to the festival organizers and we tell them that we have children's workers who are certainly properly screened, going through the background checks, and we will care for the children of the people at that festival. Anybody coming, we'll provide child care. And many times we're talking about some rides that we might put together, but offer caring for children not just passing out a bottle of water, but doing something. Have some farmers markets on your property. You could do that for those of you that have the right property. Do some farmer markets. Go to, again, local town and offer the opportunity for that to occur on your property. Do festivals on your property. Churches around here, and I'm watching across the United States, they just had an Easter festival. Some of them did them this past weekend. Others are going to do them this weekend. It could be in forms of Easter egg hunts, but make it community wide. Really go out there and offer it to the community. Do some serve weekends. A number of our Baptist churches are scheduling some times this summer, particularly where the weather's tough, where it is like in New England. But this summer they're gonna have a whole weekend where they don't do worship, they don't do Sunday school. They're going to set up projects and they're going to go into the community and they're just going to serve. Have some of your small groups or Sunday school classes become, I call them go teams or care teams or serve teams, is that there's needs in our community, not just our church, in our community, for people to go in and give a 4-hour, just go in and relieve a caregiver for 4 hours. You see the drift here. Don't be afraid to sponsor some events in the local towns or even some sports teams. May not be your sports teams, but if Grace Baptist Church or Friendship Church is sponsoring a Little League team, a Little League soccer team, one, what great marketing. Number two, what great generosity. Feed a local hospital staff. That's been really big during the pandemic, just to go and feed them. Feed a local school staff. Feed a local first responders. Feed families at Thanksgiving and Christmas. Have a client in Cambridge, Ohio. They run about 85, and the pastor just cast the vision that next Thanksgiving they're going to adopt 10 families to make sure they're fed. And they're going to do the same thing for Christmas. They're going to adopt 10 families to provide Christmas for those families. Have a Love Our Community month where everything you're doing that month is you're focusing, on your community. So I promise you, these might spur some thinking for you to do more. But if we get out there, it's going to cost. It's called generosity. It's going to cost us some finances to do this, but it's going to make a huge impact as to who's walking through our doors to hear the gospel, the literal gospel preached, because they're seeing it lived out in our own lives. So,
Tom,
Randall,
I got a couple of quick questions.
Great.
One is, are you expecting most of this stuff to be budgeted for, like the community events you're talking about, or are you thinking some of this is going to be like special giving to make it happen?
It could be either way. I mean, remember, there's 3 pockets of giving, so you could budget some of this. My own church actually budgets, for some of these events. You're not going to be able to do all of these. I mean, these are just numerous ideas, but you could actually budget, plan ahead, or you could take a special offering. I like the budgeting process better. So you can do either or.
My impression is, my opinion is most churches do not budget enough for an event. They need to be willing to spend a lot more. Sometimes 5 times as much as what they have budgeted, sometimes 10 times as much as I've seen, like a few $100s, and that's not enough to do a lot of.
That's exactly right. And this is where we have to have a bigger vision with a, shall we say, swallowing hard when we're in those, quote, planning meetings for budget, because this is new. Again, going back to a few people in our churches that may have some means, sometimes you seed it by going to them and asking them if they would be willing to fund this. There's an Assembly of God church in Connecticut that I've been working with, and the pastor there has been doing some food giveaways all during the pandemic. And he called me and he said, can you help me a little bit? I said, yeah, go ask somebody. So he said, that scares me to death. I said, just go ask them. If you think they've got the capability, again, if you think they have it, go ask them. I said, come back to me, and if I've done wrong, we'll figure it out. He called me, wasn't 3 or 4 days later. He said, man, I'm rejoicing. I asked them if they would be willing to fund the entire day of giving. And they asked me how much it was, and I was scared to death to tell them it was $7,500, and said that the family immediately pulled out their checkbook and said, is that all? And they wrote a $7,500 check. Sometimes, remember, we've got to embrace the ministry of asking, that to do some of these events, even if it's one of them. I mean, if your church just says, we're going to do one this year, cool, here's what it's going to cost. And sometimes maybe 1 or 2 people would fund it. I promise you, it will make a huge impact in your community and in your church.
And and I notice you've got some ideas on here that you could do almost for free for the churches that are, maybe the people are in a
Right.
low income community and the
Sure.
people in their church don't have a lot of money. But also, if this is just a list of suggested ideas, are there resources out there where you could find more ideas on how to use generosity, like specific event ideas for maybe if a church is stumped for an idea?
Well, number one, they can always call me. Okay. And I offer myself freely to anybody on the webinar. If you want to call me, I'm very, very happy to give you some more ideas. Also, the very next slide is Giving 365. If we want to go to it, is that this is a free website. And it's worth more than being free. Okay, there's some websites that they're worth being free, but this one has much more on it, in greater detail of what we've talked through tonight. Maybe not necessarily on some of these events, but on the other aspects. And so just go and sign up, and you will get numerous ideas, and you can go to that website and get just phenomenal resources.
Perfect.
And from there, I'm just going to say thank you, and thank you. And what questions do we have from our audience?
All right. Well, we have one question from our audience, and then I have definitely thought of some. And if anybody's watching who wants to ask some questions and you didn't have a chance to put it in the chat yet, please put it in the chat. But what about, you said the 3 buckets of pockets of giving. What's your opinion on other sources of income, like selling ads in your bulletin or something to that effect?
I think we have to be creative. While that, I'm going to say it like this, while that may not be my style, it doesn't mean it's wrong. is that I think we've got to be very creative in engaging our community. And if we can have businesses to sponsor our bulletin, if that's something we need to do, then amen. Sometimes it could be that you could creatively think, could they sponsor something else than an ad in our bulletin? And would they be willing to do so? But yes, I have no problem with other sources of giving. I mean, I have no problem with if someone wants to really work hard, there's some grants available even for some of the activities that I discussed relative to community events. But someone would have to really do a lot of research on grants. My own church, I will tell you that a local business person loved what we were doing with caring for children. They're not a member of our church, but they funded it for us because they saw what we were doing. And so, yeah, you may have to do some things. You know, I grew up in a very poor community, church planter, Dayton, Ohio. And our youth, we did car washes, not to fund the budget, but to take mission trips. I mean, we even collected bottles when they were 2 cents a piece. I mean, I'm gonna age myself, but you know, we did all kinds of things. And the fun thing about car washes, we never charged. We just said donation, and our average donation was higher than what we would have received if we had charged per car. So every church has to deal with what's our own theology and philosophy, but it's all God's money. So I might as well get it into God's economy.
And you know what? Can I give a testimony?
Absolutely.
Because I want to brag on Tom a little bit, because I was given his name by Dr. Dorsett, and we talked in January, I think it was. And one of the things you said here tonight, which I think is important, is we have 52 opportunities to talk about giving. And one of the things I thought about for my church, I do the finances there, and you're absolutely right. We don't pass a plate anymore.
Right.
And I think a lot of churches, they just rely on the fact that people know there's a box back there. And so when I talked to you, Tom, I was thinking about, well, what are creative ways we could be doing that offering every single week?
Yes.
So starting in January, and we've been doing it since then, the first Sunday of the month, we highlight a North American missionary that we talk about.
Great.
And we talk about the reason that we can, that missionary is on the field is because of the cooperative program. The second week, we take a foreign missionary and we talk about them. The third week, we talk about a ministry in our church that's affected by our giving. The fourth week, we do a scripture and a prayer based on stewardship and generosity. And then the fifth Sunday of the year, we actually, our pastor or one of our elders preaches on giving. So we have an intentional strategy, and it was because I had talked to you and you said, you got to put the word out there.
Yeah, you know? It's communicating, and it's communicating effectively. It's not communicating crisis. It's communicating the joy of giving. God loves cheerful givers.
Yeah.
You know, and it's hard for us to understand that Jesus talked more about generosity / possessions than he did heaven and hell combined, than he did love, faith combined. And so there must be something magical to really, you know, being able to break through that wall of what it means to be a giver. And I like to think that maybe the enemy likes to keep us from talking about it, because the enemy knows that once we break through that spiritual wall, that there's blessings abundant, and that's not a new Lamborghini, but there's blessings abundant, you know, in our spiritual life. So yes, thank you for that testimony. That encourages me.
and the Southern Baptist Convention has what they call missionary moments. Yes. And so I pulled all the missionaries right from those missionary moments. We put a picture up on the screen. They have a script and a prayer for that particular missionary. Yes. So, I mean, I didn't have to invent anything. There were already resources out there. So
they're out there. And I would encourage, again, not just to show them only, but to use how they share the story and bring it on into our local church. Here's what we're doing too.
Yes.
Because our people can get really excited about, quote, missions sometime without getting excited about the mission of the church.
Right.
And it's because we're not telling the story.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. But anyway.
Yeah, great.
I wanted to throw out there that we have By the way, Sandy, could you put a link to the missions moment somewhere so that people can find that?
Yep.
Uh, and uh, I wanted to point out that Terry Dorsett has a book out, The Heart of the Giver, which is
Yes.
really good at um, building the person to be a giver, that discipling the giver, and it has lots of stories in it, like what you were saying, Tom. That's, in fact, I think that's the best part of the book. The stuff that that Terry wrote is great too, but the testimonies at the end are fabulous, and it's in 4 languages, I think. So that is a great resource to train your people to be givers. But wanted to point out, uh, if your community is wealthy, like my church is in a wealthy community, there is a possibility of, instead of giving to the community, because our community doesn't really need much in the way of money. We have very few poor people. I'm more interested in ways of getting the people from the community involved in the process of giving too. I don't
Yes.
know if you have any resources or ideas for how to bring the community into the giving process, because they'll show up just to write a check sometimes in a
Well,
wealthier community.
and one, take advantage. I mean, I want to say it appropriately. Uh, make sure that you then use that, because Jesus said, "Where your treasure is, there your heart will be." The verse does not state where your heart is, your treasure will be. It says where your treasure is. And it may be that in some of the more wealthy communities, like the one of which you speak, getting them to just write a check, which is what they can do, is the pathway to their heart. And don't shy away from asking them. The one thing I've learned is that we don't ask, even when we're talking about what, in the community, is that there are people who are willing to fund a mission project, who are willing to fund something in your church. If you approach them in prayer, you make the proper case, you share with them what you think the outcome would be and the benefit to your church and to the community. And then, as the gentleman did in Connecticut, ask them, would you be willing to fund this? And if we don't ask, we probably won't get. And that's, that's the challenge. It's the hard line to cross over. And I get it. I totally get it. But I think in everyone's case, no matter the socioeconomic level, we always look at the widow's mite, and that was the poorest person there, and she gave, and that was the greatest offering. We can all be givers no matter what our socioeconomic level. We probably can, in your community, can probably write larger checks, but it still may not be the widow's mite. So
my dad was a pastor, and he has always said, if you have 10 households in your church that tithe, they can support the pastor at the average level of earning in the church.
that's exactly
And so
right.
as long as you have 10 giving households, then everybody on top of that is giving basically to exterior mission. And anyway, it's a really
Great.
interesting.
I love that philosophy. Totally love it. So,
Well, I have tons more questions, but we have pretty much run out of time. So it's great that you have made yourself available. Feel free to contact Tom or me, and I can contact Tom, and we can keep the conversation going. If people have ideas on how to be generous, you'll be able to put on this video forward, so we keep this conversation. I think generosity is seen to be really important. I think our communities expect churches to be, and they should. This was generous. So this is a great conversation.